Hi friends, welcome back to DigiTalk and the second session of Docker. In the first session, we have covered about the basic concepts of Docker, what exactly is Docker. And in this session, we are going to cover the Docker architecture along with the Docker components. So before going ahead to understand the Docker components and architecture, let us see a difference between the virtual machines and containers. So when we talk about the virtual machines, then first we have an underlying infrastructure. Right. On top of that, we install a software which is called hypervisor, and then on top of hypervisor, we create the different guest operating system, also called the different virtual machines. Right. And then once we have the virtual machine, then we have to install the different applications on our virtual machines. Right. And each virtual machine act as an independent machines because we have to install the dedicated operating system in each and every virtual machines, right? So what does it mean? First, we have the hardware in place. On that hardware, which is also called a server or host, we install the hypervisor. On top of hypervisor, we get the features to create the different virtual machines. And once we have virtual machines in place, we install the dedicated operating system on each and every virtual machine, and then we install our applications. Okay, apart from that, we have a second type of hypervisors as well, right, where we first install the operating system on top of our infrastructure hardware, for example servers and host, right? And once the operating system is installed, on top of the operating system we install the hypervisor software, right? And on top of that we create the different virtual machines, right? And then we install the different applications, and each and every guest operating system are the independent virtual machines, right? So in a nutshell, what exactly happening in the virtual machine technology is that we have an underlying infrastructure. In between you have a hypervisor, right, which is translating the call from your virtual machines to the infrastructure, right? So what exactly we do is that in a virtual infrastructure, we distribute our hardware resources to the different virtual machines. For example, if I have a hard storage of 300 GB and I have 3 virtual machines, so I may distribute the 100 GB of storage to each and every virtual machines which is running on top of my hypervisor on the infrastructure. Similarly, if I have a certain set of RAM, for example 16 GB of RAM, so I may allocate 2 GB or 3 GB to each virtual machine based on the requirement, and this will be the dedicated allocation of RAM and the storage to each and every virtual machines, right? So this is the case of in a virtual machines where the translation of the call, that means translation of the requirement from the virtual machines, is reaching to the infrastructure, baseline infrastructure, with the help of intermediary hypervisor software. But when we talk about the containers in comparison with the virtual machines, so we have our infrastructure hardware. On top of that, we install the operating system, for example the Linux operating systems. On top of that, you can just install the container engine, which is also called the Docker engine, right? So on top of Docker engine, you can initiate or create the different containers, and inside the container you can create your different applications and all of the dependencies of your applications, right? So what is the difference coming here in comparison with the virtual machine is that you don't have any mediator hypervisor for the translations of the call of the hardware requirements from virtual machine to your base infrastructure. We have a container engine, which is just like a software we install on the operating systems, and with the help of that we are directly reaching to the underlying infrastructure from the container. That means containers are also like a dedicated package. Just like we have a virtual machine, we have a dedicated package which is also a container, right? But what is happening here is that the requirement of the infrastructure, underlying infrastructure, by each and every container is directly reaching to your infrastructure. There is no intermediary in between, just like virtual machines where we have hypervisor in between, right? So it reduces certain kind of a overhead and improve the performance as well, and the complete end-to-end management of the containers is also very easy in comparison with the virtual machine. So this is the basic difference between your virtual machines and the containers. Okay, and let us understand the Docker workflow. So now, before understanding the Docker component, we are directly jumping on the workflow, because workflow is also based on the Docker components. Okay, so I will give you some idea of the workflow, how your Docker works, and with the help of this workflow you can easily understand the Docker component as well. Okay. So first thing that we have in the Docker is the Docker engine, right? So Docker engine is called the heart of your Docker, okay, which is the main, you can say, main platform or the main software of the Docker that you need to install in your host operating system, right? So once you have a Docker in place, the first thing that you have to do is you have to create your Docker images. So I have written pre-build or custom as well. This will understand in a short duration. But before that, please focus on the Docker images. So what I said is that once our Docker engine is in place, we have installed the Docker. After that, first thing is we have to create the Docker images. Now, what exactly is Docker images? Okay, so when we compare it with the traditional architecture of the hardware and software, what exactly we do is we have a operating system, right? On top of that, we download the software and then we install the software. Once the software is installed, then we do the certain kind of a configurations of the software, and on top of that, we do certain kind of a customizations and we build our applications, website, and deploy the code as well, right? So that means we are doing the installation of software and then we are doing a lot of customization based on our specific application requirements, right? So now in Docker, where we said that everything is running inside the container, right? Which is a portable package which you can transfer from one host to another host easily, right? So for that, again, what you need a package or a software, or you can say container kind of a thing, where you have to install your software and then you have to customize your software based on their application requirements, and then you can run your applications, right? So whatever the things that we have been doing in the traditional architecture, the same thing we have to be done here as well. But the difference is that instead of installing the directly softwares and doing the customizations on top of your operating systems, we build the images. So these images will contain your softwares, right? And then all of your customizations that you do for your applications, so that completely will be inside your images, right? So once your Docker is installed, you have to create the Docker images, and to create the Docker images, we use the Dockerfile. So Dockerfile is a main configuration file. The default name is Dockerfile, right? You can change this file name as well, that we will see once we'll go for the implementation. But here what you understand is that you have to create a Dockerfile which will contain your all of your uh, steps that you need to be execute for your application. For example, you want to build a Nginix web server image. On top of that, you have a certain kind of a static files, images, videos for your website, right? So you have to define the complete syntax in the Docker file. Like first, you have to create the image of Nginix web server. After that, you have to copy your code from your local system to your Docker images, right? For your static files or whatever the website code that you have written and which is placed in your local host system, that will be copied inside your images along with the software image with the help of the code that you have written in the Docker file, right? So the first major component is your Docker engine, which you have to install. After that, before building the images, you have to create a Docker file. Okay, and once your Docker file is created, based on that we create the Docker images, right, which contain your software image as well as all of your customizations that you required for your application. And once your images are ready with all of your customizations and everything, then you can run the Docker container, which is the running instance of your Docker image, right? So that means you have a complete software and customization which is inside your Docker image, and using that you can run the different Docker containers, okay, which is the running instance of your Docker image, right? Now, when we talk about the Docker images, then you have two things, pre-build or custom. Okay, so what I said is that you have a image which include your software as well as your customizations. Okay, so you have two options. Like if I'm saying that Docker image include your software, that means you have to download the software, right? And after downloading the software, you have to package that software in the Docker images with the help of build command, right, which we have to write in the Docker file. So this is the first option, where you are downloading the software and then you are building your own images. This is called a custom, okay, custom Docker image. But apart from that, as of today, apart from Docker Hub, there are a lot of organizations, or you can say every organization which is there in the Docker business, they are providing their own pre-built images for the multiple softwares. Okay, so they have already built the images for you. You can just only pull the image from their registry and then you can customize that particular image according to your requirement, and then you can use that as well. Okay, so for using the Docker images, you have two options. Either you can choose to use the pre-built images, or you can create your own image as well. Okay, and all these images, if I talk about the pre-built images, those are exist in the Docker Hub or Docker registries. Okay, for if I talk about only the Docker, then the official registry for the Docker is hub.docker.com. Similarly, almost all organizations are providing their own registries, so you have to log into their registry website, and then you have to create your account, and then after that you have to log into your host to the Docker registry, and then you can pull your pre-built image from the Docker registry. Okay, along with that you can push to the Docker registry as well, like you want to maintain your images, okay, which you want to pull in the different hosts from anywhere, then you can push your image in the Docker registry as well. Okay, and when we talk about the Docker registry, it could be public or private. So public registry, which is available for everyone. Private is specifically private for your organization. You want to disclose that to the outer world. Okay, and it could be your public Docker registry, which is maintained by the third party organizations, or you can create your own registries as well for maintaining your own images, right? So this is the workflow of your Docker, and the major component what we saw here is Docker engine, Dockerfile, Docker images, which is pre-built and custom, Docker container, and then Docker registries, which could be your public or private. So these are the basic components of your Docker. Okay, so this is the architecture that we have saw in the first session, that we have underlying infrastructure. On top of that we have a operating system, and on top of that we install the Docker engine, and then we create the different containers for our applications, right? So infrastructure is your physical layer, your physical host. Operating system could be your Linux or Windows, right? And then we install the Docker engine. That means you have to install the Docker platform or Docker software, right? And once your Docker is installed, we have to create the different containers, but the containers are based on the different images, which will contain your software as well as all of your customizations, right? So now you have a Docker platform software, which is also called a Docker engine. So Docker engine is the heart of Docker. What we call Docker engine, it is a heart of Docker, right? And responsible for the entire containerization process. It manages the entire life cycle of containers, from building images based on Docker files to running and stopping containers based on those images. That means it is a base software or base engine, right, which operate your complete Docker and all the containers. So all the operations, that whatever you are doing, whether you are starting a container, you are stopping a container, you are building your own images, or you are pulling your pre-built images, so whatever the work that you are doing in the Docker, it is executed with the help of Docker engine. Okay, so now what we are doing is we are doing the manipulation of our different images. We are creating the containers, we are starting the containers, we are stopping the containers. So all of these things you can do with the help of different components. Okay, so all of these components, which is internal to Docker engine, right, which is utilized for all of this work, it is called the Docker daemon. So you have a different kind of a daemons, they are doing the different kind of a work for the Docker engine, right? And then to execute your Docker commands, you have the different options. One is the CLI, command line interface, which is mostly we use, right, where we enter the different command from the command line. But if you wanted to use the APIs for controlling your Docker engine for different kind of operations, right, you can use the APIs as well for controlling your containers in the Docker engine, right? So now the three more component here is, apart from Docker engine, is Docker daemons, REST API, and CLI, which is command line interface, and all three components are related with the Docker engine. Now on top of that, what we have said is that we have to create the Docker images. So now Docker images is official and custom and extended images on top of base images, right? So what I said is that Docker images are containing your softwares along with their all of your applications and custom code and configurations, right? So Docker images could be official or custom. Official in the sense it could be the already pre-built images, as I said, which is available on the different registries, which you can pull directly on your system, and then you can start using that one for the customizations. And once you are doing the customization in the images, that means you are extending the images for certain kind of a customizations, right? For example, if you have downloaded a pre-built Nginix web server software image from the registry, okay, after that you may have to copy your application code, website code inside the image of Nginx before starting your container. So that means you are extending that image which you have downloaded from the registry for your custom applications. So this is called the official, custom, and extended images. So extended images are the blueprint for container. They contain the application code, runtime libraries, and dependencies need to run the application. And extended images are built using the Dockerfile, which contain instructions for creating the images. Right. So apart from that, you have a Docker registry. So as I said, either you can build your own images by downloading the softwares, or maybe you can pull directly from the different Docker registries. Okay, for example, the official Docker registry from the Docker is hub.docker, and from Oracle, the registry is container-registry.oracle.com. Similarly, you will see the different registries from the different service providers, right? So once you have images, you have to start the container, which is based on the Docker image that we have created, right? So what is Docker container? So container are instances of Docker images, right? So we have to start the Docker container, which is based on the image that we have created. They are runnable instance of images and include the application and its dependency. So these are the running instance of the application, right, which is based on the image that we have created. Containers can be started, stopped, moved, and deleted. For instance, running a container based on the previously created image, right? So once we have image in place, then we can start the different containers, and you can stop and start the containers, and then you can delete, and you can do the different operations inside your containers. So these are the major component that we have so far. Your Docker platform or Docker engine, which contain three components, which is Docker daemon, REST API, CLI command line interface. On top of that, we have to create Docker images, and then we start the Docker containers, and all of these components are inside your Docker host. That means you have a server or a machine where you have all of these components are running, and then Docker images could be your local, or it could be in the remote Docker registry. So you can push and pull the images from the Docker remote registry, right? And apart from that, you will have a Docker client. So what exactly Docker client will do? It will do the complete operations to manage your images and containers. For example, to build your images, to pull your images, to push your images, to run your containers, all of these operations that you are doing with the help of Docker client, right? So most of the time, this Docker client will also be inside the Docker host. Okay. And this is the official architecture that you will see at most of the places on the website, where you will see a client, a Docker host, and a registry, right? So it is the same concept that I have discussed. So registry, where you have some pre-built images that you can pull down, right, for your uses. And then inside the Docker host, you will have a different kind of a Docker daemons are running with the help of Docker engine, where you can create different containers, and you can have a local images as well. Okay, and then we'll use the Docker client to build our Docker images, to pull our Docker images, to run our containers, and for different purpose. So this is our registry, this is Docker host, and this is the client. Now this is all about the session 2, and then next session we will discuss about the Docker file syntax and then official and custom images. Thank you.